Hi again then guys, and welcome to the 52nd episode of GT Masters on Gran Turismo Sport for the moment, and for quite a few episodes to come as well. And in this particular installment, we're featuring a very significant new race car, and it's definitely going to be a very popular one because the road-going version of this car is already really popular on Gran Turismo 6, and the car is of course the Ferrari 458. But in particular, this is the GT3 spec Ferrari 458. It runs in the Group 3 class, as most of the new race cars on the game do, at least in the beta, and this is a strong all-rounder. It looks the part, it sounds the part, but most importantly for racing of course, it performs as you would want a Group 3 machine to do. Now, of course, it's not a runaway success type of vehicle. It's not going to dominate every event because you wouldn't want any one or two particular vehicles to do so. That being said, though, there are definitely Group 3 machines, as with any other class, that are better in some ways than other cars. So as far as spec goes, initially, what do you get from this vehicle? Well, the engine is like the road-going version, a 4.5 litre, it's naturally aspirated, and you're putting out not necessarily top-tier power, but it's pretty high, 569 horsepower, and incidentally that arrives at 9,000 RPM. So it's a pretty high-revving, rev-happy, likes-to-be-worked kind of engine. The torque isn't overly high, which isn't too surprising, 426 foot-pounds, but still, that's actually not too bad. It's more than enough to get the job done, especially when the car is as light as this one is. It only weighs 1,166 kilos, which is incidentally lighter than the Alfa Romeo 4C from last week. That's pretty impressive. And thanks to the fact that the weight is nice and low and the power is pretty high, the horsepower per tonne is very good. In fact, it has among the best horsepower per tonne of this class. 488. That's very impressive. In fact, there are very few cars in the Group 3 class that manage to mix power and weight to the level that this one does. Usually they're very powerful, but also slightly heavier, or really light, but don't have as much power. The 458 is one of the relatively few cars to have a very good amount of both. It is light, and it's powerful. It's not necessarily the best at either, but it's good enough to have a very high average. And that can be pretty evidently seen from that 488 horsepower per tonne. And overall, although we're not aware of any of the prices currently of cars that are on Gran Turismo Sport, you can assume, or at least I'm going to assume, and we'll see if I'm correct or not, that this is probably, if the prices do vary, going to be one of the slightly more expensive Group 3 cars. Because Ferraris are pretty expensive, as is. They're always pretty expensive on Gran Turismo, and this is, after all, a racing version. So I wouldn't be surprised if this one was a little bit more expensive than some of the other Group 3 machines. Maybe not the most expensive, but pretty expensive nonetheless. Now, that being said, it's got a very good spec, for sure, but what's it actually like to drive? Because there are other vehicles with great power, or great torque, or great weight, which don't necessarily deliver in the way that you'd expect them to. Well, the great thing about the 458 is it's not going to disappoint people. This is a good car. It has a good mix of everything in a very similar way, funnily enough, to those on-paper numbers. It handles itself very well through corners. As you'd expect, it can be tail-happy. The front end is a little bit lighter than some others, certainly lighter than a front-engine car would be, and you can feel that. It's not necessarily the number one beginner's choice of Group 3 car, but not many of them are. That's why the 4C stands out so much in that regard. This vehicle is very much so a car that lends itself towards purists. It feels like you are doing the work, and although that's not necessarily entirely the case, the 458 is a very well-developed car that does use electronic advantages to its advantage, it does feel like more of an old-school race car, but in a good way. Not that it's difficult to drive, but that it's more focused, there's more driver feedback, there's more passion to this vehicle. Some of the other cars, like the BMW M6, for instance, or the Nissan GT-R, they're big and they're powerful, and they're certainly not slow, but there's not much character there. They get the job done, but they're not necessarily passionate or even fun. This one is. And consequently, I would put this in the category alongside stuff like the Alpha 4C, the McLaren 650S, and a couple of others as well, that are fun as well as being fast. Overall, this car is going to be popular no matter what, because people already love the 458, and of course the race car is going to get a huge amount of use, because as is, we don't really have any racing Ferraris to work with on Gran Turismo. On GT5, we did. We had both Formula 1 cars to play with, and that was awesome. On GT6, though, we don't, because the FXX is not a race car. It's a one-make track special, which is illegal for any form of official racing. So technically that's still not a race car. This one, on the other hand, is, very much so, and it's pretty much guaranteed, because of that, to be a fan favourite, in a similar way to stuff like the Lamborghini Huracan Group 3 machine. You already know, regardless of how good or bad it is, people are going to use it. A lot, and that's justifiable, because it's a really good car. Now, in terms of lap time potential, it can definitely give you very good lap times. It's usually in the higher end of the grid. I wouldn't necessarily put money on the fact that it will win 9 times out of 10, but it definitely has the potential to give victories. And of course, you could say that about any car in the class, because they have to be. That's the whole point. But some do definitely feel better than others, of course, and I would say this is one of the better ones. As far as interior cam goes, I would also say it's one of my personal favourites. The cockpit does look very good in the 458 anyway, and as a race car, it's quite an interesting looking cockpit to be in. That sounds like a trivial thing, but trust me, if you're using cockpit mode all the time, it's nice to have a good looking cockpit to work with, rather than just a blank rubber with Alcantara steering wheel and nothing really going on. This has more than that. Again, just like with the driving style, there's more passion there, which is exactly what you'd expect from a Ferrari. So overall, this is a vehicle which is definitely going to be used a lot, but thankfully I can report for you guys who are looking forward to driving it that you're not going to be disappointed. It's a good one. But that's it for this pick overall. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.